My parents refused to support my dream career. Now they watch me on TV and still tell everyone I work in media like it's not real. I'm a 29-year-old guy, and ever since I was a kid, I wanted to tell stories that reached millions. Not stories in books or essays, but ones that came alive on a screen. I used to sit cross-legged in front of our old box TV, watching the credits roll and whispering to myself, one day my name will be there. But in my house, dreams like that were treated like diseases. You either cured them or hid them before they embarrassed the family. My parents were the kind of people who worshiped security. To them, success meant a government badge and a pension. My father worked at a bank and believed every problem in life could be solved with a stable paycheck. My mother was a school teacher, practical and proud of it. When I told them at 12 that I wanted to be a filmmaker, they burst out laughing. "That's not a career," my dad said between chuckles. "That's something rich kids in America do. You'll thank us later when you're working a real job." After that, I stopped telling them my dreams out loud. But I didn't stop dreaming. I drew storyboards in the back of my math notebook, filled with scenes I wished I could shoot, kids on rooftops, strangers in love, families falling apart. I'd sneak my father's old camcorder into my room at night, setting up fake interviews with my friends. The red recording light felt like magic. It was the only time I felt seen. Then, one day, my mother caught me filming in the living room. She folded her arms and said, "You need to stop wasting time and focus on real subjects, like accounting." Her words hit harder than I expected. I remember staring at her, realizing that the people who were supposed to believe in me never would. That was the first time I understood what loneliness really felt like. And it wouldn't be the last. By the time I reached high school, the message was clear. Creativity wasn't just frowned upon, it was forbidden. My parents had already decided what kind of man I'd become. My father would say it during every dinner, like a mantra. Doctors, lawyers, engineers, that's who make it in this world. My mother would nod along, proud of how my older sister Aisha was already excelling in medical school. Then both of them would look at me, waiting for me to say I wanted the same. I didn't. I couldn't. But I learned to fake it. I smiled when they handed me engineering brochures, pretended to be excited when Dad talked about scholarships and government jobs. Inside, I felt like I was slowly vanishing. Every time they praised Aisha, I wondered what it would feel like to be loved without conditions. At school, I found small escapes. I'd stay late in the library, pretending to study while scribbling short film ideas on the back of my notebooks. My English teacher once caught me writing dialogue instead of an essay. Instead of scolding me, she read it and smiled. "You've got a gift," she said softly. "Don't let anyone take that away." That single sentence stuck with me longer than anything my parents ever said. But at home, reality crushed whatever hope I built. My father started comparing me to his friends' sons, each one with a steady path, a real future. "You think life's a movie?" he said once when I told him I wanted to apply to art school. "Stop living in fantasy. Grow up." His disappointment stung deeper than anger ever could. That night I tore up my art school forms and threw them in the trash before he could. I remember the sound of paper ripping. It felt like the sound of surrender. I told myself I'd follow their plan, just to keep the peace. But deep down, a quiet resentment began to grow, one that wouldn't stay buried for long. I ended up enrolling in business school, my father's proudest moment and my personal nightmare. From day one, I felt like I was living someone else's life. Everyone around me talked about numbers, markets, and profits, while I sat there imagining scenes, dialogue, camera angles. It wasn't that I was lazy. I just couldn't connect with it. My parents thought I was finally on track, but I was suffocating under the weight of their expectations. I remember one night in my freshman year, I wandered past the student center and saw a flyer, Campus Film Club. New members welcome. My heart jumped. For the first time in months, I felt something other than dread. I showed up at their next meeting, clutching my notebook full of sketches. They were a small group, just 7 students, but when we talked about movies and storytelling, I felt alive again. It was like stepping into color after living in black and white. From then on, I lived a double life. By day, I was the quiet business major my parents wanted. By night, I was writing scripts, borrowing cameras, shooting short films with classmates. I hid it all from my parents. I even used my food money to rent editing software. Every time I hit export on a new video, I imagined showing it to them. Imagined, just for a second, that they'd be proud. But that fantasy shattered when my father visited one weekend. He found my camera and memory cards in my drawer. I'll never forget his face when he held them up. "You're still doing this garbage?" he said, his voice rising. "Do you want to end up a beggar?" Then he threw the camera on the floor, the lens shattering. My mother stood in the doorway, silent as if she agreed. I didn't cry until they left. I sat there in the wreckage, the screen of my camera cracked like my own reflection. That was the night I realized I could either keep trying to please them or finally live for myself. And I knew, deep down, that choice would cost me everything. After graduation, my father already had everything planned. A corporate job at a friend's company, a safe start, with good pay and no risk. He even printed the offer letter for me, sliding it across the dining table like a peace treaty. "All you have to do is show up," he said. "Stop chasing childish dreams." I stared at that letter for hours that night, feeling the walls of my childhood closing in. I'd lived my entire life making everyone else proud, except myself. So the next morning, I packed a duffel bag, left a note, and took the first bus to the city. I didn't even tell them goodbye. I found a tiny studio apartment with peeling paint and a leaky faucet. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The freedom was intoxicating and terrifying. I had no plan, no savings, just a handful of short films and a camera I'd saved up for. I started taking freelance gigs, filming weddings, small business ads, even music videos for struggling bands. It wasn't glamorous, but every shutter click felt like rebellion. When my parents found out, my father called, furious. "You're throwing your life away," he shouted. "You're an embarrassment to this family." My mother didn't say much, just a quiet, "Come home before it's too late." But I couldn't. Not this time. I hung up and sat in the dark, shaking but certain. That call severed something inside me, a thread I'd been clinging to out of guilt. The months that followed were brutal. Some nights I didn't eat. Other nights I'd fall asleep mid-edit, surrounded by cables and coffee cups. But there was also joy in the struggle. I started interning for a small local TV network, running errands and setting up lights. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a foot in the door. I still remember the first time I saw my footage on air, a 10-second clip of a city street. My name wasn't in the credits, but I didn't care. I whispered to myself, "I made that." It was small, almost invisible, but for me, it was everything. The TV station became my second home. I'd arrive before sunrise and leave long after midnight, often the last one out of the editing room. Most people saw it as grunt work, carrying gear, fetching coffee, labeling drives, but to me, it was a masterclass. I studied everything: how the lighting crew built atmosphere, how producers cut dialogue for emotion, how sound shaped tension. Every frame mattered. Every detail taught me something about storytelling, but the world outside didn't care how hard I was working. My rent was late almost every month. I lived off instant noodles and vending machine coffee. When I couldn't afford transportation, I'd walk across town with my camera slung over my shoulder, convincing myself it was exercise. I kept waiting for a big break that never came. Sometimes I'd scroll through my sister's social media, her new house, her vacations, her parents' proud captions, and feel an ache in my chest so sharp it was almost physical. My parents still called occasionally, but never to ask how I was. They'd lecture me about real life and stability, reminding me how Aisha's salary was triple what I made. "You're wasting your youth," my father said once. "When you grow up, you'll realize dreams don't pay bills." His words replayed in my head at night, louder than the city noise outside my window. Still, I kept going. I volunteered for every project I could, news segments, talk shows, local events, hoping someone would notice. Slowly, they did. A senior producer began trusting me with small assignments. Then came my first real chance directing a short local documentary about street artists. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine from start to finish. When it finally aired, I sat in my dark apartment, staring at the TV as my work filled the screen. No applause, no calls from home, but for once, I didn't need them, because that night I saw something they never had. Proof that my dream was real. A month after my documentary aired, everything changed. A producer from a national TV network saw it and reached out saying she was impressed by how raw and human my storytelling felt. I almost didn't believe the email was real. I reread it 3 times before replying. A week later, I was sitting in her glass-walled office overlooking the skyline, my hands shaking as she offered me a junior director position on a new primetime show. It felt surreal, like every sleepless night had finally meant something. When I got back to my apartment, I called my parents immediately. For once, I wanted to share good news. "Dad, I got hired by National Broadcast on a TV series," I said, my voice trembling with excitement. There was silence on the other end, followed by his flat tone. "So, you're still doing that media thing?" My mom added, "Well, at least it's something stable now." I waited for pride, for warmth, anything, but it never came. Just quiet judgment disguised as politeness. That call broke me in a way I didn't expect. After hanging up, I sat staring at the phone, realizing no achievement would ever be enough for them. They'd already decided who I was, a failure pretending to be an artist. But their silence did something else too. It freed me. I stopped working to prove them wrong and started working to prove myself right. The show became my entire life. I threw myself into every scene, every script, every edit. I'd sleep in the studio some nights covered in cables and paper notes. The thrill of seeing my name in the credits for the first time felt electric. People I'd admired were shaking my hand, praising my work. But even in that moment of triumph, I couldn't shake a single thought. Would they still call this a hobby? That question lingered like a splinter, one I'd soon be forced to face again in the harshest way possible. Within a year, the show exploded in popularity. Ratings soared, critics praised its authenticity, and suddenly my name wasn't just in the credits, it was being mentioned in interviews and online articles. I started getting messages from strangers saying my work had moved them, inspired them. For the first time, I felt like I was part of something bigger than myself. The station even gave me my own small team, and we began developing a spin-off series. It felt like I was finally standing on solid ground after years of crawling. But success has a strange way of revealing people's true faces. My relatives, who once whispered that I was the disappointment of the family, started showing up again. They'd message me with fake warmth, calling me our talented boy, asking for behind-the-scenes photos or shout-outs. My mother began sharing my clips in family WhatsApp groups, but always with the same caption. "Our son works in media now. Something with cameras." I could almost hear her tone, minimizing it, like it was some side job. I found out through a cousin that my parents had been telling everyone I edited shows for a local company, as if saying TV director was too bold. They'd brag about seeing me on air, yet twist the story to sound humble, manageable, something that wouldn't challenge their image of what success should look like. It stung more than I expected. They weren't proud of me. They were proud of the attention I brought them. One night, I overheard my dad's old friend at a family event say, "He's doing well for himself, though it's not a real career, you know. Media is just luck." My father laughed in agreement. That laugh hit harder than any insult. I left early, pretending I had a meeting the next morning. But as I sat alone in the car, headlights cutting through the dark, I realized something bitterly ironic. I'd finally become everything they said was impossible, and they still couldn't admit they were wrong. A few months later, I went home for the first time in almost 2 years. My mom had been calling more frequently, saying, "Your father misses you," though her tone made it sound more like a command than affection. I wasn't planning to visit, but guilt got the better of me. Maybe, I told myself, things would be different now. Maybe they'd finally see me, not as the failure who chased fantasies, but as the man who made it work. The moment I stepped through the door, though, I knew nothing had changed. My childhood room was still a storage space for their old furniture, my posters ripped down years ago. My father barely looked up from the news. "You still doing that show thing?" he asked. I smiled weakly. "Yeah, it's going great, actually. We just hit record viewership," he grunted. "Well, as long as you're not wasting money," my mother chimed in. "At least he's finally earning something." The same tone, the same quiet contempt. That evening, a family dinner was arranged. Cousins, uncles, old family friends, all eager to catch up. The conversation turned toward careers, salaries, success stories. Then my father laughed loudly and said, "Our son. He just presses buttons for TV shows, some editing stuff." The room chuckled politely. My chest tightened and I felt heat rising behind my eyes. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words froze in my throat. After dinner, I excused myself and walked outside. The air was cold, the street quiet except for distant dogs barking. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. I'd spent a decade fighting to prove myself. And yet, standing in that driveway, I felt 12 years old again. Powerless, invisible, small. For the first time in my life, I didn't cry out of frustration. I cried because I finally understood the truth. No amount of success would ever rewrite the story they'd written for me. And if I wanted peace, I'd have to write my own. After that visit, something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger anymore, it was clarity. I stopped trying to earn their approval. Every phone call, every attempt to explain my work, every hope that they'd one day say, "We're proud of you," it all stopped. I finally understood that their validation wasn't missing. It was never meant for me. I poured everything I felt into my next project. When the network pitched a new docuseries, I offered an idea that had been haunting me for years: the cost of parental pressure and generational expectations. It was raw, personal, and terrifyingly close to my own story. To my surprise, they greenlit it immediately. For months, I traveled across the country interviewing people who'd been disowned, mocked, or emotionally crushed for choosing unconventional careers. Their words hit me like echoes of my own past. Late one night, while editing, I stared at a clip of a young artist saying, "My parents say they love me, but they only love the version of me they approve of." I paused the footage and sat there in silence. That sentence summed up my entire life. When the series premiered, it exploded far beyond what anyone expected. It trended for weeks, sparking debates and conversations everywhere, from classrooms to talk shows. People wrote essays about it. Strangers emailed me their stories. For the first time, I wasn't just making content, I was making impact. And yet, through it all, my parents said nothing. Not a single call, not even a text. I knew they'd seen it. My cousins mentioned how neighbors congratulated them. But in every conversation they just said, "He works in media," something with documentaries, as if saying the word success was forbidden. Still, I didn't feel broken anymore, because for the first time, I realized I didn't need them to see me. The world already did. But that peace wouldn't last, not when fate decided to throw me back into their world one last time. The docuseries went on to win a national award. The night of the ceremony, I stood on stage under bright white lights, the applause echoing like a wave crashing over me. I thanked my team, the crew, and the people brave enough to share their stories. But when I said, "And to everyone who was ever told their dreams weren't real, you're the reason I'm here," my voice cracked. The audience thought it was emotion. It was, but not the kind they imagined. After the show, I went back to my hotel and sat alone in the dark, the trophy gleaming on the nightstand. I opened my phone, hoping for a message, just one, from my parents. Nothing. I scrolled through social media, my name trending, my face on news pages, colleagues tagging me with congratulations. And then I saw it, my mother's post. A grainy screenshot from the broadcast, captioned, "Our son works in media." We saw him on TV. No mention of the award, no acknowledgement of what it took to get there. Just that same dismissive phrasing. I laughed out loud at the irony. Millions of strangers had celebrated me that night, and yet my own parents were still pretending my career was something casual, almost accidental. He works in media. as if that phrase alone could shrink everything I'd built into something safe, something small enough for them to accept. The next morning, my sister called. "They watched it," she said quietly. "Dad even told the neighbors." "What did he say?" I asked. She hesitated. "He said he's glad you finally found a hobby that pays." That line gutted me more than anything else ever had. Not because it was cruel, but because it was honest. That's truly how they saw me. Still the boy with impractical dreams. I ended the call, looked at the skyline from my hotel window, and realized something I never thought I'd admit. Success doesn't heal everything. Sometimes it just exposes who was never cheering for you in the first place. A few months after the award, I went home again, not out of guilt this time, but closure. My mother had mentioned my father wasn't feeling well, and despite everything, I couldn't ignore that. When I arrived, the house looked smaller than I remembered. The walls that once felt suffocating now just seemed tired. My father was sitting in his armchair, thinner, quieter. He looked up at me, surprised, almost hesitant. "So," he said after a long silence, "how's that media job going?" The same tone, the same condescension wrapped in small talk. But I didn't flinch this time. I sat across from him, calm, steady. "It's going well," I said. "The docu-series reached over 50 million people. We're working on a follow-up season now." He nodded slowly, avoiding my eyes. "That's good. As long as it's stable." That word, stable, landed like a familiar bruise. I smiled, but it wasn't forced anymore. "You know, Dad," I said quietly, "I used to think I needed your approval to be happy. But I realized something. You don't have to understand my dream for it to be real." He looked at me then, maybe for the first time as an adult. I could see confusion in his eyes, maybe even shame, but he didn't say anything. My mother, standing in the doorway, tried to break the tension. "Your father's just old-fashioned," she said softly. "He's proud in his own way." I turned to her. "Maybe, but you both taught me something valuable. You showed me what it means to believe in yourself when no one else does." The room went quiet. For once, I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to prove anything. I stood up, placed my award on the table between us, and said, "That's what you called a hobby." Neither of them spoke. I walked out the door feeling lighter than I ever had before. Not triumphant, just free. It's been 3 years since that day, and I haven't been back home since. I still call occasionally, birthdays, holidays, the usual pleasantries, but I no longer chase meaning in the silence that follows. My parents still tell everyone I work in media, like it's some vague part-time gig. My father even jokes that I make those little internet videos. I don't correct them anymore. I just smile, because the truth doesn't need their validation. The truth plays on millions of screens every week, carrying my name in bold letters. My studio feels like home now. The buzz of lights, the echo of cameras snapping on, the quiet hum before a take. This is where I belong. My team calls me the guy who made it without permission. And sometimes when I catch my reflection in the control room glass, I see that kid again, the one who used to whisper dreams into a camcorder. Except now, the whole world is listening. A few months ago, during an award show, a reporter asked, "What would you say to the people who didn't believe in you?" I paused for a moment and said, "I'd thank them. They taught me how to fight for my own voice." It wasn't bitterness, it was closure. Because I realized something I wish I'd known years ago. You can't teach people to see you differently if they refuse to open their eyes. Now, every time I'm on set and the director calls, "rolling," I think back to that small, dark room where I once cried over a broken camera. Back then, I thought I'd lost everything. But really, I was just shedding the version of myself that needed their permission to exist. They'll probably keep telling people, I work in media. And that's fine, because when the credits roll and my name flashes across the screen, I know exactly who I am.